Welcome to WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. WitchLit is brought to you by Thousand Bolt Press, a family-owned independent publisher established to produce the books we want to see in the world. Titles including Changing Past by Yvonne Abarrow, Conjuring the Commonplace by Lane Fuller and Corey Thomas Hutchison, and my latest book, Verona Green, can be purchased directly from thousandvoltpress.com or wherever you buy books. Diana Helmuth writes about urges to travel, to be in nature, and to feel understood. Her first book, How to Suffer Outside, was a National Outdoor Book Award winner, and her freelance work can be found in various anthologies, travel guides, and humor magazines. She studied anthropology and Arabic at UC Berkeley and can often be caught moonlighting in Silicon Valley's startup land or producing the occasional podcast. She was born and raised in Northern California. Her latest book, The Witching Year, is out now from Simon Elements. Diana Helmuth, welcome to WitchLit.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you here. I'm excited to talk about this very interesting book. But before we get to that, our first question for everybody is, especially you are also working in podcast land and with all of the different ways to get media out in the world, why still write? Why still write books?
Oh, man. This is so funny. I was just listening to Thorn Mooney answer this on your previous episode. I don't want to totally rip her off, but I will say part one is, I love to do it. And it feels like a privilege to be able to do it. And it's one of these things that's like, I'm going to do it for as long as they'll let me, I also think there's something about a book that there's still some, what's the word I want? Some reverence, some esteem that a book has that isn't present in more rapidly and more easily digestible, shorter, rather, forms of written communication, like blogs, essays, magazine articles. Not that those things are bad or aren't edited or anything like that. That's not what I'm implying. But like having written a lot of different things in my life, from advertising copy to blogs to magazine articles, a book is actually not a solo project. It is, you don't have one editor, you usually have several, you have beta readers. So many people help you write a book. They fact check it. They go through. I mean, it is a production. So I like that people treat books with a lot of respect because I think they have earned it. And I think they're still worthwhile. I mean, sometimes famous people will just write books about a topic just to say they have written it because they know it will lend them credibility. And because a lot of people are involved in fact checking and researching and making a book. Yeah.
No, I think that totally makes sense to me. And I always think it's important to remind people that books are not something that happens in a vacuum with one person in a vacuum, I guess. There's a lot that goes into making that happen, like even in the writing it. Yeah. Like I always, think about the fact that, basically my husband has a full-time job that pays most of our bills is the reason why I can write. And that's a privilege too. So,
yeah, I mean, I think, people have been reading less over the years, but also I think that's what I thought for a while. But I think books are actually having like a real moment right now. You could argue it's only certain genres. Unfortunately, not the one I write. I write nonfiction. But, nonfiction, I feel like just kind of putters along while fiction goes up and down and different genres surge in and out of popularity. And nonfiction just kind of like maintains this flat line through the decades. But I still think there's a ton of value there. I wish that writers could be paid more so that most of the writers, have day jobs or someone supporting them, or they live, I don't know, in a cardboard box if the other two things aren't happening.
Yeah.
But I'm also one of those people that does believe everyone has like several stories inside of them. And it is a privilege to be able to actually express them in whatever medium. Yeah.
It's funny you say that about nonfiction. It's kind of like the, I don't know. Maybe the flat line is just that it's a workhorse. But then I also think about, like people like to kind of flag on romance, but romance keeps the lights on for publishing. And a lot of people don't talk about that.
my Simon Element, actually, they told me that explicitly. They said, oh, I hope I'm getting this name right, because I'm not actually a big reader of romance. Colleen Hoover, they were like, she's keeping the lights on. So if you see her, tell her thank you. And I said, okay.
No, romance is huge. I mean, it's more than 50% of profits for publishing. And it's like, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I have aspired many times to write romance, but I keep murdering people in my books. And so it's not romance. But I have lots of romance writer friends and they're awesome. And boy, do they know how to network and make stuff happen too. Like, I really appreciate that about them.
Yeah.
Cool. So The Witching Year, for folks who haven't read it yet, do you want to talk about like kind of how this came to be and kind of what was the seed for this idea?
Yeah. So there's kind of two answers to that question. The first one is that my first book, How to Suffer Outside, was a very niche book, but it won the National Outdoor Book Award, which was a very big deal. It was my first book. I was extremely proud of myself. And my agent was like, okay, what are we doing next? And I was like, she's like, you don't want to lose the momentum. I'm trying to make writing a career, right? So I'm like, okay. I'm thinking of things. And I'm talking to two friends in my writing group one night who are both witches. And we get into a fight about astrology because I had written this piece about astrology, effectively dragging it, questioning its very premise. How can this philosophy that claims to give you self-discovery also just tell you who you are based on factors you can't control? That doesn't feel, I don't like this. I feel like we're being duped. I don't like that this is calling itself feminism in a lot of cases too. I mean, I just went off. And my friend Lauren, bless her, was like, you really shouldn't publish this as it's currently written. And she was correct. But we got into this larger conversation about astrology, and she disagreed with a lot of my takes. And she said I was only seeing what I wanted to see, and I was being really reductive. And then she said, it would be funny if you got your chart read and tried to live astrologically for a year. Because I was talking about astrology kind of in the broader context of witchcraft as a trendy philosophy for female empowerment. And I was looking at the things within witchcraft that I felt actually were empowering and actually were not at all, but said they were.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, Meg Elison, these are also two characters in the book. They end up being my kind of like witchy fairy godmothers who repeatedly sort of talk appropriate levels of sass to me when I need it. She said, no, it would be really funny is you should try being a witch for a year. And I thought, oh my God, that's actually an incredible idea, because it's not that I had never heard of witchcraft before. I grew up in Northern California. I knew as many practicing witches in high school as I did practicing Jews. And I knew like a Christian. I mean, it's witchcraft was very popular where I grew up. I had been to some ceremonies, I wasn't new, but I had never really, I wasn't new in the sense that I felt like I could have opinions about it. And yet at the same time, these two witches very carefully called out the fact that I had never actually really sunk my teeth in a meaningful way. And I think they were coming at it from before you criticize this space, how about you step into it a little more honestly? And they're correct. And it is something I'd been curious about my entire life, but I had always been really nervous about because I was afraid of what would happen if I embraced my spirituality. I was afraid of people thinking I was stupid. I think I was afraid of losing my mind, like quite literally. I was afraid of becoming untethered from reality. And turns out all that stuff makes for a pretty good book. And that is a theme that's explored in the book is not just, I tried to become a witch, here's what happened, but why was it so scary in the first place? And this whole conversation about shame and judgment and community and et cetera, and ended up being huge, huge, huge themes in the book.
Mm-hmm. It's funny to me that you listened to Thorne's episode because she and I also talk about that. What do you mean you're a witch? You don't look stupid conversation. And I have never had anyone approach me that way. Like, it's usually more, I guess, coming from the South. It's like, oh, but you're going to burn in hell, not, are you stupid? So,
Sure. Yeah. That's, yeah. Yeah. In my, I don't know, coastal liberal enclave, I went to high school in the early 2000s, and it was very much like Bill Maher and Christopher Hitchens had successfully, that's who I'm blaming anyway, kind of spiked the water with this
let's
idea.
blame them for a lot. Let's just
spiked the water with this idea that if you were religious, you were stupid. And if you were smart, you read a lot of Sartre and hated people and were an atheist. And that was kind of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were responding to what they saw as a lot of problems in evangelical Christianity. All those are valid. A lot of people have serious religious trauma in this country, and I'm not trying to discount that. And so when they end up afraid of religion, I'm like, I think that's very valid. But I also was, and I write about this in the book, I realized I was deeply tired of God being dead, so to speak. I wanted God to be alive. I wanted God to be in my image. I didn't like pretending this side of me didn't exist. Even if it makes me feel stupid, according to Bill Maher. Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I know a lot of parts of the country were not like that at all. Not like, I think that's kind of a uniquely NorCal thing. Maybe Portland and Seattle, maybe New York. I'm sure other places.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sure like places that are less Bible Belt oriented. It's true. Yeah, it's interesting because I think, like for me, I mean, I grew up in an ostensibly Christian household. I mean, we didn't attend church regularly until I went on my spiritual journey and started going to like all the churches I could find where nothing clicked for I guess now obvious reasons.
Right.
But like, I think at some point in college, and they said, well, you could just be an atheist if nothing's working, and I was like, well, that seems more dogmatic to me than other things I've come from.
Right.
To just say absolutely no. And I was like, that's not there's comforting. No mystery there.
That's not what I want either. I don't want to just give up on the whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think at one point I officially, identified as an agnostic.
Yeah.
And I kind of joke that I still am in some ways because I don't know that, like you said, I've never really felt stupid about witchcraft or magic. I have felt skeptical sometimes.
Yeah.
And then something will happen that you're like, well, okay, then. And you had some stuff like that happen in your year of, well, okay, then.
Yeah, I did. There in the book is a lot of mishaps and failures and successes of a spiritual quest, and the successes have stuck with me. I mean, I am a different person on the other side of the experience. I don't. It's not, if anyone is listening, I don't proselytize in the book. I didn't want to write a book that was like, here's this girl and she's disillusioned with life. And then one night the moon is talking to her and then she follows her true calling. And now she's powerful and happy and self-actualized and all her pants fit her. That's not, because good for the people who had that. I don't think that's most of us. The moon was not talking to me. I was like, why isn't the moon fucking talking to me? It's supposed to be talking to me. Why isn't it talking to me? Like stuff didn't work. I had to really figure a lot of stuff out. It was frustrating. And I wanted to actually show that. And the nice thing is it came out on October 3rd. I guess it's going to air in February, but I've been getting comments already from some people that are like, thank you for telling the truth, that it's not linear and witches aren't just like magically born one night they step into the right moonbeam and then it's all there. It's like, this is hard. I had to work. I felt dumb a lot of the time. Things didn't click. And yeah, I think it's just a nice dose of reality to a really complicated spiritual practice.
Yeah. And I think about like just reading through the book and like for folks who haven't read it, it's kind of the chapters are like a day. And kind of broken down into days that happen and then inside chapters. And I was just thinking, like, you watching this arc of your journey through this in a year and a day is like watching most people's arc through their life of practice, like, because you're writing about it and being very intentional about trying to experience as much as you can in a year instead of kind of like this organic thing as it happens. So I can't imagine like writing about having this, I guess writing for publication. I shouldn't say that. I could imagine journaling about it, but I can't imagine writing for publication and having, these experiences at the same time. Like, that to me seems like two very intense things happening at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of the tricky thing about writing about your own life is, on the one hand, it's extremely vulnerable. You're not doing it right until you feel like you're doing too much. That I think there's a beautiful quote by Neil Gaiman about that. Was it Neil Gaiman? Was it Stephen King? Who said, if you're writing, the way that you know you're doing it correctly is you feel like you're walking naked down the street and all your neighbors can see you, which is how you know you're doing it correctly. And that is terrifying and I think true. And then what's funny about the whole thing about writing nonfiction is that the whole time you're like, oh, thank you for the opportunity. Truly, it's an honor. I'm so lucky. I'm so privileged. I mean, you beg to do it. Mm-hmm. You pitch people, you pray, you cry, you sweat, you beg, and then you get it. And what you're getting is like tap dancing naked, which is, I had that thought several times. Like, well, okay, I'm gonna write a journal about my own personal spiritual quest, and assume that this is all going to go really well and not hurt me. I'm trying to do that. You're told a lot. I'm sure you've heard this. You're told a lot when you're a writer, you are not your work. And I'm trying to tell myself that now, even though I wrote something deeply personal and really private and really vulnerable. But what's also true is that it is a polished version of reality. I mean, we tried to keep it extraordinarily authentic. But I'm also trying to tell myself there is still a part of my spirituality that's just mine that maybe no one can see. Mm-hmm. But it's hard. I won't lie. It's actually quite hard to remember that because there's just I published a diary. It's good, bad, and the ugly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that keeping some part for yourself is also consistent with witchcraft, right? I mean, there is this to keep secret part of witchcraft that is not for public consumption, despite what Instagram and TikTok may tell you. There's things that you're supposed to keep quiet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and there was stuff that I did in the book. Like, obviously, I wanted to be really careful around people's real names, their identifying information. There are people in the world, in this country, who will still happily persecute someone who calls himself a witch, even if this is just someone who basically like wants to talk to trees and knows what to do with sage, or not to do with sage. Yeah. So I was really thoughtful around that. I didn't want to punch down, in comedy, you say you can punch up or punch down. To me, witches and neo-pagans are still a very marginalized group. It's a voluntary subculture of people that a lot of mainstream likes to make fun of. And I didn't want to just make jokes at their expense. I thought that would be pretty crass. And I mean, I identify as a neo-pagan now firmly. So I also didn't want to make fun of neo-pagans because I identify as one. So there was a lot of thought and care put into privacy and how to make these jokes without it being like a damnation of the whole community or calling anything stupid. Except myself when I felt stupid. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think anyone who's come to witchcraft, I mean, maybe people who grew up in it have different experience. I can't speak to that. But there's going to be times when you feel silly, especially in the beginning. Like, it's so far removed from what most of us experience, either growing up without religion in our household or growing up in a more mainstream, what is called mainstream religion. And yeah, like, you're just going to feel silly. And there's always that little part, at least in my brain, it's like, is this doing anything? Like tapping the mic, is this thing on? Like
Totally. Is this doing anything?
Yeah.
Is this thing on? Yeah. That was something tricky about witchcraft, because the whole point of witchcraft is right off the bat, I was like, this is prescribed megalomania. I'm sitting here in my office with all this incense burning, this playlist going, and these candles going, and all these things happening, and I'm reading out of a book that I'm supposed to command the guardians of the watchtowers of the east to guide me in this work. Like, who the fuck am I? And why should these immortal beings bother? Oh, well, because I said so, because my willpower. Okay. I'm like, okay, but wow. I was a little like self-conscious. Like, why would they listen to me? Mm-hmm. I'm just this little dust mote that's going to be dead in their blink. Like, why? I never fully got through that, but I did have one witch tell me at one point, she's like, yeah, that's what witches do. We go into a circle in the middle of the forest and hang out, and we top God. That is. And again, I feel like every time you say anything about witches or witchcraft, you have to say hashtag not all witches, not all witchcraft, which is true. Mm-hmm. That's the other frustrating thing about this journey, is how personalized every witch's journey is. That to say I'm going to go be a witch for a year is going to look real different for one person versus another, just wildly. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things I thought was interesting to you had these, like you described them as your witch godmothers kind of along the way to kind of help do it. But also that, like, to start, you went on, best-selling occult books for the last however many years, and kind of ran into the same problem that I think a lot of witches run into, is that a lot of those bestsellers were published 30 or 40 years ago, and they don't reflect current practice.
Yeah. I mean, that was when I was trying to come up with a methodology, we did use A.J. Jacobs' The Year of Living Biblically as a bit of a foil for this. He was very supportive of my project. Thank you, AJ. He has the Bible, and of course the Bible is like, what even is the Bible? It's so debated, and he gets a lot of advisors and help books, but I was like, I don't even have a Bible. Oh boy. What do I I'll just read the smartest people. Who are they? According to who? I'll read the most historically accurate history. What is who decide? Okay. The only thing I could think of was, okay, it's a folk spirituality. It's a popularity contest. So we're going to do the bestsellers. And it was the only thing I could defend. It actually became the only thing that felt logical. Yeah. I'm not even being glib. I thought of a lot of different ways to do this, and that was the best start. And I started with Wicca because Wicca, most witches today, I feel like, don't identify as Wiccan. Most witches in the West don't identify as Wiccan, and that's fine. But the modern witchcraft movement is so heavily influenced by Wicca, and Gerald Gardner is still considered the father of modern witchcraft. He's the one who put all this stuff together in a package, and then, depending on who you believe, revealed or, invented modern witchcraft. And of course, I'm sure, as you know, for so much of the 20th century, most Wiccans simply referred to themselves as witches, leading to even more confusion.
Right. Even more confusion for everybody, yeah.
For groups. And I think people don't do that anymore. But I liked Wicca because it was a religion that had structure. There was some agreement on things. Witchcraft was this planet. And Wicca felt like a tidy continent on that planet with a charter and a government and system of order. And I was like, okay.
And a little imperial.
Yeah. A lord and lady. So I thought I'll start there. And I liked Wicca a lot. I mean, yes, there's some problematic bits of it. I think Wicca has a bad rap right now. There are a lot of younger witches who just like to rag on Wicca. And I'm like, it's really hard for me not to roll my eyes, especially since, mild spoilers, Meg at one point, one of my little fairy witch mothers basically tells me these books are too old, as you just said. They're 30 years old. You're not going to understand modern witchcraft if you steep your head in Wicca. Your head is in the sand. You got to wake up. So I went and I bought all the best-selling books that had the word witch or witchcraft in the title. I thought, okay, I'm leaving my safe little continent with its safe little rules, and I'm going into the wild, wild west, into these foreign lands where there be dragons. And all the books were written by Wiccans. They had just taken the word Wicca out, but it was like all the same stuff, just with pretty significantly dropped regulations on how to cast a circle, call the corners, what needed to be on your altar, more stuff about astrology. And what's funny is, like, Scott Cunningham was basically still writing that in like 1989. He wrote Wicca, Guide for the Solitary Practitioner. And in that book, he's insistent over and over that you don't need 10% of all the stuff Gerald Gardner says you needed. So I was just like,
including a coven. You don't even need that. Yeah.
So I really thought I was going somewhere new, and I wasn't at all, which is why, I'm not trying to force the label of Wicca on anyone, but that experience really shattered for me this illusion that there is this huge difference between witchcraft and Wicca. I'm like, I really don't think it's as big as a lot of people want it to be.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of underpinning, and even, it is a whole podcast, I'm sure. Like the difference between like traditional witchcraft, or like the Robert Cochrane Clan of Tubal Cain, that kind of witchcraft, and Gardner's branch. And then you have like fairy, and they all have things that overlap, but they're all different. Yeah. And then you have this like new, I guess I say new, like I think it's been the last 20 years or so, people who are folkloric witches who really look at fairy tales and folk practice and, kind of excavating what Christianity paved over with, European pre-Christian beliefs. But a lot of that stuff still borrows from those Wicca traditions, or witchcraft revival traditions, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you're, not to give Gerald Gardner all the credit. I mean, he was tapping into the sources he had available, and I think when a lot of people go and say, screw Gerald Gardner, I'm going to go back to the source, I think you usually end up just tapping into the same stuff he was tapping. It's and maybe drawing different conclusions, but it's the unfortunate thing is we only have so much source material, and then it very quickly it starts to become this kind of petty, who do you believe and why? And that, for me, that headache is ended by a return to the question of, why am I doing this again? And what is the point of this again? Is it to be historically correct, or is it to be a functioning spirituality? What is a functioning spirituality? Well, that's a fascinating question. So glad you asked. Here's my book. Here's a book. Like, here's a whole.
Here's one answer of thousands, probably.
Here's a genre of books about that topic.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like I imagine at some point, because I think about like what you said about like calling the watchtowers and we're like a blip in their reality, is that we're still in the infancy of the modern witchcraft revival. And things are still really messy. Yeah. And I wish that I was going to stick around long enough for them to get less messy, but I don't know that that's a thing.
Yeah. I think I do feel like we're in a kind of a neo-pagan revival, because I think a lot of people who were agnostic for most of their life growing up are attracted to things in neo-paganism because they come from a similar place of, I'm not ready to shut the divine out of my life, but none of the big three feel right. And the big five or six, nothing there quite feels right, either because of community or because of, just values misaligning. Like this is a true story. I got, I'm really not trying to, it's going to just sound like I'm trying to brag. I got solid straight A's in college, because I still assessed my self-worth with doing my homework and making a teacher like me. And I wanted to be liked. So I got straight A's except for one class, which was comparative religion. I got a B. It was my only B because I was so depressed at the end of that class because we had gone through, I think it was the big 8 religions of the world, and all of them, with perhaps a subtle exception to Taoism, but even then it's questionable, were just totally misogynistic. And women were supposed to be chaste and loyal to their husbands and mothers, and that was it. There wasn't even really much said about what happened to them after they died. Mm-hmm. Or it's not even that it was bad, it's just that it wasn't there. And I remember asking the teacher that and being like, what is here for me exactly? You know, I'm a rib, I'm a slave, I'm a wife.
I can't reach nirvana. I can't
reach nirvana. I think that's actually what sent me. I got to Buddhism and I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I didn't know that. And I was so pissed off. I was so pissed off. And I just couldn't give a shit about the class after that. I really had trouble. And then, you know, you have generations of women, because witchcraft is dominated by the girls, gays, and theys, right? Like, who are taking in this information. Then here's this religion that's like, hey, divinity is for you too. And you don't just have to be someone's second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And honestly,
the future is female. So
yeah. And I mean, I've seen so many of that, like the future is female, but the future is witches. Like I've seen t-shirts at like events and rallies and stuff. And I'm like, yeah,
I'm here for it, man.
and I really do. Like you said, it really is, you know, the she's, gays, and theys. And I really think part of that, like you said, is that reaction to not really being welcome or not really having a place of any kind of empowerment or self-actualization in mainstream religions, even ones that, you know, Westerners think are more enlightened. And I think they are more enlightened in some ways, but everything has some truth in it and everything has some problem.
So, yeah.
And witchcraft too. I mean, I'm not going to say there's no problems in witchcraft. It is not paradise.
I mean, that's true. It doesn't advocate for slavery at any point, though, which is something I really like about it. Anyway, okay, we don't have to dunk on the Abrahamics. Sorry, let's not do that. I don't want to dunk.
I don't want to dunk on it either, because, like, I mean, as someone who has like a folk craft, like there is a lot of Christianity still mixed into that.
Yeah, I think Christian witches are super cool. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you have like, you know, in J. Allen Cross's book, Brujeria, his whole witchcraft is basically based on a folk interpretation of the Catholic faith. And it's beautifully written and I completely buy it. So I'm not dunking on Christians, I promise.
Well, and again, I always think, you know, it's not like we had this conversation over dinner with my family last night. It's like, I have no problems with Jesus. I have problems with the church. I mean, that's really what it comes down to for me. And I think that's true for a lot of people. It's like the ideas, not all of them, but a lot of them are great. The application, especially in, you know, the modern West, especially in the United States, really, that does not look like what you can read in the book to me. Like the book is better than the practice.
Yeah. I know. Well, I also have heard word on the street is the Bible is full of hidden spells. Mm-hmm. I wish I had learned that a little more when I was doing the year, because I definitely would have tinkered in that, but I didn't get that memo until after we published. But that's fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I you know, and I think about, like, you know, so many folk practices like involved, even for people who are literate, involved the magic of owning a Bible itself. Like the Bible itself was a magical object in their home.
Yeah. The books that contain powers, they don't just write about them, but they possess powers of their own. I mean, the Quran is definitely like that. I love that. I can't get over that. Just going back to what we were first talking about, this idea of books that just have inherent power sitting by themselves.
Yeah.
It's too romantic. It's too fun. I just love it. I do.
So, like for you, like I can't even imagine. And you share some of this, but like I want people to read the book, so I don't want to be too spoilery because it's really weird. It's almost easier to spoil nonfiction because there's so many things that happen in the book.
Yeah. It's
But
a lot to condense a year into a book was hard, actually.
yeah.
We left a lot out. Yeah.
So like what, well, maybe that's the question then. Like of the things that got left out, like what really has stuck with you afterwards? I mean, I think at the end, I don't want to spoil. At the end, you have conversation with yourself about where you are at the end of the book. But now you say you do identify as a neo-pagan. So what got left out that's really been the longest lasting thing for you?
Honestly, and we included some of this, but maybe I should have pushed to include more of it. Well, when you're a white American and you are writing a book about a spirituality that rests on like your ancestors' pre-Christian practices, and the land you live on, you think about where you come from, and it's 2021. There's a lot of racial talk going on. There's riots going on, and we cut out a lot of stuff where I actually get really, really deep into processing my white guilt. Mm-hmm. You know, my results of my successful existence in the United States is due to ethnic cleansing and genocide in some cases of certain First Nation tribes. And I don't like know for certain if all my ancestors were directly involved in that, but they were complicit. They had to be for sure. Mm-hmm. At least some of them. You know, I didn't come over from France last week. So as I'm sitting in
even France has things to answer for.
So. Right. And like 6 other countries. As I'm sitting in, you know, Ohlone land in the East Bay, thinking about how they don't even have federal recognition. And I'm educating myself about a lot of developments in my area, about, you know, groups of people that would prefer to be spoken about in the present tense, not the past tense, who I hadn't even known, who, you know, they were originally here. And what is my relationship to this? It got very layered, very, very, very fast. And it was hard not to feel guilt. And 2 things are true about white guilt. Everyone's sick of it. No one wants to hear about it. And I also firmly believe it is the only natural initial response to all of these things. And I think when white people don't want to talk about it, they're running from the depth of the guilt they know they will feel. Mm-hmm. So a book that actually really helped me process a lot of this in a very positive way was Brujas, The Magic and Power of Witches of Color by Lorraine Montague. I'm obsessed with that book, made me cry 3 times. It walks you through Lorraine's own journey with, you know, being an oppressed group and also like being a colonizer and all of these different things. And in watching her go through it, you kind of have permission to do the same for yourself. I mean, it's so tender. Mm-hmm. And compassionate and just searingly honest. And it's, you know, it's not a pointed finger. It's a hug. It's an invitation. It's such a good book. It was probably the best book I read the whole year. And I recommend it to everybody who asks me, what was your favorite book? I'm like, Brujas, Lorraine Montague, read it. It's important. You don't have to be a witch of color. Like it's for them first, but it's actually for you. My white friend, like, trust me.
You need to read this too. Yeah.
You know, not that I'm like fully healed or anything, but it inspired me to have these conversations with myself and to see it as an invitation to justice rather than just to feel bad. Mm-hmm. And justice feels good. So that's nice. But anyway, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here. There's stuff in the book that is included there, but it was kind of amazing how rapidly my little witchcraft journey, for me anyway, turned immediately into this like cascade of white guilt and problematic ancestors. And get in touch with your ancestors. What if my ancestors suck? Yeah. Like, what if I don't want to talk to them? What if I don't think they're rooting for me? What if they are bad people who did bad things and don't want my redemption? Like, what then, dude? And that's still not fully answered for me. That might be a second book. I don't really know. But I think there are a lot of witches out there having
that
great
ancestral journey is interesting. Like I guess I'm gonna placated myself with the idea that, my family hadn't been in the United States that long, blah, blah, blah. On my dad's side, that's true. I'm third generation.
Right.
They came late 1800s from Germany and Sweden. And then when I started actually doing genealogy research, my mom's family's been here since Salem, and they were involved, and they were on the bad side, and that was like, oh, okay. So again, I think you're right. Guilt is the immediate, I think, natural reaction to finding out that the people whose line you carry did bad shit, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's when we stop there because we don't want to have that feeling, or we're just like, well, it wasn't me. So I'm going to, instead of thinking about like, well, what is unjust in the world now because of these things that happened? Not that I did them, me personally, but I am here for whatever sacrifices and horrors they committed to survive. That's why I'm here. So what is my job in the present? And I don't, I think that's one of the issues I have personally with like the witch aesthetic rather than people who practice, be a goth girl to your heart's delight. I'm not calling you out, but to actually proclaim the title witch is to have to wrestle with some really ugly things. I think you have to wrestle with the ugliness too. And I like that you talk about that in the book, that it is not this surface thing. It is not the pretty aesthetic. It is like real deep work to kind of step into this space.
I actually have two conflicting thoughts on that, because what's funny is I like the witchy goth aesthetic to a point. It's not like my favorite, but it's extremely cool. And I think that the thing that does annoy me is that if I called myself a witch, people would put that aesthetic association on me. And I'm like, that's actually not my vibe. I'm like a very crunchy granola REI girl. And in fact, there are so many witches among you, more than you know, because they don't have the witch aesthetic.
They don't have the witch aesthetic.
You would never know. They just look like your office assistant, Brenda, or your kid's school teacher, or like, the fucking mailman. Like, you have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that has always bugged me, is that witch became an aesthetic as much as it became like this actual very serious spiritual practice. And at the same time, this is probably the most proselytizing I get. When I see people dabble in the witch aesthetic and think witchcraft is cool, I'm like, that's the first step. Like, welcome. I get this like sinister villainess laugh, like, no, yeah, buy that skirt with the moons and the stars on it. It's totally innocent. It's totally innocent. But it's like a slippery slope between that and Scott cutting it out. Yeah, I do. I think the more people engage with witchcraft and neo-paganism, the better. Mm-hmm. Again, this is the most proselytized you will ever hear me. Not saying everyone should become one, but I think there's a lot here for every single person. Man, woman, non-binary, and it's nice to explore. I think it made me feel like a better person in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I think I like what you say in the book about, but I want it to be mainstream. Like, I want everyone to have these thoughts and these things.
I don't like being a rebel. That's why I don't like the witch aesthetic. I don't like sticking out. I'm a person who has stuck out my whole life. I don't enjoy it. It's not fun. It's not cute. I dislike it strongly, actually. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's a lot. And oh gosh, I want to say it was Laura Tempest Sackcroft has this thing about what a lot of witches want is to be basically the Episcopalian soccer mom, but a witch.
Totally. That's so true. Like, I know so many witches who literally are that. They're just these like, from the outside, they're just like New England soccer moms. You would have no idea that they go home and commune with pre-Christian deities. You would not know. You would not know.
And I love the idea that there is a space for that. And, to me, like, because I was a goth girl and because that is, I don't, my relationship with it has changed in that I mostly just buy things that are black to wear rather than like the full goth aesthetic, because I have changed my idea about consumerism around that kind of stuff. But, like, do I love my Doc Martens? Yes, I do love them. And will I wear them until they fall apart? Yes, I will. That
Same.
kind of thing.
I love my Doc Martens.
Yeah, but it's not that's not the work to me, I guess. Like, I love the aesthetic, and I love, like, I went to the Alameda Witch Fest this past weekend, and just the fashion show of it was incredible. And I loved it. And I loved being around all those people and not feeling like you stick out, whatever you have on, like that's just a place to be safe. But yeah, it's not the work. And I don't like the conflation of it, but I also I'm of two thoughts too. Like, I want people to embrace the ideas, and if it comes through the aesthetic, that's great. And also, I just refuse to participate in a culture that shits on things teenage girls like. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. That's. I mean, long live the Barbie movie, which like reclaimed femininity for us all. Like, do you hate this because it's stupid, or do you hate it because it's just really feminine and you associate that with stupidity? I'm in this whole phase of my life right now where for a long time I was training myself not to put like exclamation points and emojis in my emails because I wanted to sound really mature and serious. And then I was like, I'm just equating that with that kind of emotionless, passed down British High Lord version of this is what someone who should be taken seriously sounds like. And I was like, fuck that. Like, no, yeah. I don't want to.
The world is cold and dark enough.
The workplace. Yeah. Let's feminize the workplace. Why, if we all agree men are terrible, why are we all trying to sound like them in our emails? Like, just no.
And men don't even want to be that way. I mean, that's the thing. Like, men don't even want to be what we think men are.
No, I mean, that's a whole other, I don't know if we're off topic now. I mean, I think there's actually, I do believe
topic doesn't really happen on this show. It's okay.
The headlines that are like, boys are in a crisis right now. And I really think they are, because we still live in a gender binary society for the most part. And women have spent the past 70 years redefining themselves, and men have just been like kind of freaking out and watching the whole time. And it's like, well, what are you guys doing? And they're like, just gently imploding. I'm like, you should talk about that. We can all talk about this. And it's starting. But yeah,
I'm so grateful that it's finally starting. I mean, having raised a boy, who's now a 28-year-old man, it's painful to watch a whole group of people not have an emotional outlet because our culture, men and women in that culture, have told them you're not allowed to have emotions. Like, anger is not an emotion.
Yeah. It's it's not great.
Yeah. But welcome to Witchcraft. Come.
Yeah. Well, it's something I've noticed. This is just in my personal life, but I have noticed witchcraft tends to attract the girls' gays and theys, and Nordic heathenism tends to attract the boys. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's some problems in Nordic heathenism with the white supremacy tangents, which is a bummer. And I respect that the heathens in that community that are working to kind of eradicate that and be like, this is not, this is not what we're about. This is not
probably not what they were about either. Let's be honest.
Yeah. But I do wonder if that's just because at first glance, this is what the Vikings did. So there's this war, this outlet for your little inner war boy. Mm-hmm. Versus witchcraft is like, do you want to be a beautiful flowing goddess that like is as fair as the Daphne tree? Like, yeah, I mean, one feels more feminine than the other. One feels more masculine, stereotypically. Or rather, one feels softer, one feels violent.
Well, and so much of that too is predicated on what's happened in popular culture. It's not about the reality of like Nordic practice necessarily. Yes, it was probably bloodier in some ways, but so is a lot of witchcraft too. But yeah, it's based on a lot of things that turn out not to be true. That are mostly just like concepts that we've developed about, things. Not that, again, not that I think your practice has to be historically accurate, because that's not even possible. But
right, like what is that even? Unless you're a hereditary witch and and good for you. Well, the rest of us on the outside have to suffer.
Yeah, we have to suffer
with the
and find our own
resources
ways.
we can find.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and I think, when it, kind of to, I guess, rope it back around into writing, like, I'm impressed that you made it through a year, that you were able to get this down. I'm sure, like you said, there's a lot left on the editing floor, but I just, it's such a project to take on. And I think, witches and non-witches can both benefit from reading it.
Well, my hope was we wanted to write a book about witchcraft that wasn't just for witches.
Mm-hmm.
And I realize I'm on a podcast where everyone listening is probably a witch. And my hope is that witches like the book. I do get notes from witches sometimes who say, I see parts of my own journey in this. Thank you for writing this. They mean so much to me. I save every single one of them because I wrote this book going, I do not want to piss witches off. I mean, I'm sure I can't catch everyone, but like, I really don't. I don't want to make fun of them. That's not what we're doing here. That was really, really, really important to me from day one. At the same time, my book right now is currently like #1 in new releases in Wicca on Amazon. And I was like, oh, fuck, like, no, that's not, this isn't a book about Wicca. This isn't a how-to. It's not a primer. It's, we were trying to do something a little more Mary Roach, a little more Caitlin Dowdy, a little more AJ Jacobs. If I really flatter myself, a little more Michael Pollan,
and the witches have embraced you,
which is
at
great.
least on Amazon.
at least on Amazon. I don't think I have offended them, which is wonderful. But my hope is that this book isn't just reflecting the witchcraft community. My hope is that it was really more of a bridge to people who are witch curious, who are agnostic and are interested in this stuff, but feel pulled back. Like maybe they will find this an interesting story, a relatable story, a funny story. That was the goal. And I guess it remains to be seen if we'll accomplish that. It's been less than a month since the book's been out, but I really hope it does. Yeah, I really, really hope it does.
I hope so too. And like I said, coming at it from someone who kind of stumbled into the door of witchcraft, like, because I was looking for something like the same kind of like what you said, I knew there was something, I wanted something, but I couldn't find it in what was available to me in my small town growing up.
Yeah.
And like, I think so many people, especially Americans who are removed from their ancestral cultural practices, and, like, how do you think about that if what you were born into as a modern American evangelical, or, whatever it is, if that's not working for you, how do you make that journey? Like, I don't think it's just people who are interested in witchcraft who are having those feelings. People, whatever door they walk through that works for them, that's great to me. Like, yay.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that strongly. It feels good to have a spirituality. I mean, man, it is still, I cannot believe it is still hard for me to say that. I'm like, now, first I was embarrassed about wanting a spirituality. Now I'm embarrassed that I still feel like it's embarrassing to be embarrassed about. But it feels good. It just feels better. I swear my anxiety has calmed down a bit. I mean, I am convinced I am like, I have a lot of friends who think I have clinical anxiety. I'm just like too afraid to get diagnosed. But I am pretty high strung. Let's just leave it there. And possible ADHD. And witchcraft is not going to solve all your problems, right? That's a dangerous thing to promise anybody. But what is true is at the end of this journey, I really do feel just a little bit calmer inside and a little more okay. Not because I think everything is going to go my way, although love that for you if that's your practice.
If that's your reality. Yeah.
Yeah. It's more like just having meditated on the interconnectedness of all things and the beauty that is life, and knowing I'm a part of that. That is a peaceful thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is hard to not feel peaceful after you do that for long periods of time.
Yeah.
Not necessarily happy, not ecstatic, although there is a lot of ecstasy in witchcraft, but just base level, my peace has like risen several degrees.
Yeah.
Really nice.
Yeah. No, I mean, I too find a peace in that idea that there's just something bigger than me. Like just that simple idea. And I also, like, I've said this when I've been interviewed on podcasts about, like why witchcraft. I'm like, because it sets up some kind of stasis in me that I feel like I can function. I am clinically anxious, so like it's great for me to have something that I can kind of put those things on, and just say, hey, I have this problem. Like, if that's God or a pre-Christian deity or a tree, like whatever, that's great.
I really feel like trees are very good at absorbing our most overwhelming emotions.
Yeah.
I do. Like hugging a tree is real. Okay.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say this if I wasn't on a witch podcast, but because I am, I feel like there are people who will nod and be like, they are. Like, yes, thank you. They are.
Well, I mean, I've only lived on the West Coast for 2 years and change, and I will maintain that one of the holiest places I've been is a redwood grove. Like,
yeah, dude, they hit different, right?
It's so different. It is your smallness and connectedness and everything all at the same time.
Yeah. Save the California redwoods. I feel exactly the same way. And I lived in Washington for a long time, and cedar trees are gorgeous. They smell so good. Washington is majestic and magical and ethereal. And I don't know, man. There's just something about redwoods.
Yeah,
it really is. I'm probably biased. Just
well,
really
I lived in Washington State and on Vancouver Island briefly, and I grew up in Appalachia. So tree places all around. And I'm a newly minted proselytizer of you need to go stand with some redwoods.
Yeah. You need to go stand in the trees about it.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. Go give it to a tree.
Okay.
Just go give it to a tree.
They have taken so much. I mean, I think one of the things, and folks who've never seen a redwood may not know this in person, but their bark spirals because of how long they grow in the wind and all this. So they have this like innate spiral to the bark. And just looking at that and knowing how long that tree's been there and how many winds and fogs, and like it just like, right, it just hits different.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does.
Awesome. So on that lovely note, before we do our last question or a little game of chance, I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of plug what's coming up for you. Like I said, this will air in February. What's on the horizon, and where people can find you or read more of your work.
You can see a lot of my work at dianahelmuth.com. I have a blog on Medium. You can follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. I look better on TikTok, but I feel like people still think that's just for kids. But I'm telling you, like there's a lot of people over 30 on TikTok. Like we are here. We're not going anywhere. Yeah. At Definitely Not Lost is my handle in most places, or just look up Diana Helmuth. And if you do read the book, I really, because this was so personal to me, I really honestly love it when people email me or DM me and tell me how they're reacting to the book. I've had some incredible conversations with people, and it's just great. So if you happen to read the book, I would genuinely love to hear if you have any reactions to it. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So we joked about this a little bit, I think at the beginning or before we started talking about, my feelings about, I don't know enough about astrology, honestly. Like it's something that I've been exploring. I always pick a topic for a year to explore. Like this is kind of my own continuing ed. And so astrology was last year. This year's geomancy. So they're kind of related.
About that.
Yeah. So I'm learning, but I've always kind of leaned into my Scorpio-ness. And one of those things is not knowing how to do small talk. Like I always want to talk about like your deepest, darkest thing, like when I meet you. Which is probably again why I'm on a podcast. But so that's what this question is. And so I'll roll a die and you'll get a question about death, sex, religion, politics, or money.
Oh my God.
And if I roll 6, you get to pick. I will say that they're kind of related to your work. I try not to like just left field people. So they're related to either your book or your work in some way. You
come up with all the questions every time.
I come up with the questions. I write them for each person. Yeah.
It's like D&D. Okay, great.
Yes. And funnily enough, it is a die from a D&D set.
Perfect.
So 3, religion. How amusing.
Jeez.
So did you, and we kind of talked about this a little bit already, but did you come away from your year of witching and I guess your time since then with thoughts about whether witchcraft is a practice or a belief?
It depends on the type of witchcraft. Honestly, when I get this question, I defer to Thorne Mooney's great writings about how religion is a political term. And there's types. I have a friend who identifies as a witch, but she's like, I'm an atheo-pagan witch. And people often go, what? And she said, well, I'm an atheist, but I believe that the earth is its own kind of magic. And I think that's great. Mm-hmm. I almost feel like it's a little bit semantics. On the other hand, these definitions really, 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 really matter to people. So I actually don't want to trivialize them. I think if you are a person who believes that certain gods or god or goddess are real and they are like in the sky or in the ground, that is different than someone who believes they are metaphorical concepts. Okay. I guess that's not really what it's about to me. I mean, I think you could also say spirituality is self-directed and broad, and religion is more narrow because it is a set of rules that I think their primary purpose is to establish a community. Mm-hmm. Or to express yourself to a larger community, to define yourself for or against or a part of another community, whereas spiritual frees you from those lines. And I think that's why people prefer to say witchcraft is a spirituality, because they're not trying to box themselves in or cut themselves out of anything. But I've noticed people who are more attached to a particular community and moreover are happy and feel nourished by that community have absolutely no problem saying they are religious. Mm-hmm. So that's my personal definition. And I think the reason that sometimes people get precious about the terms is because to call someone religious when they don't feel like they're in one of those boxes is to effectively misidentify them. Mm-hmm. And people get offended when you do that.
Yes.
Like, that's not who I am. Okay. I don't think that's what most people mean by it. I think most people use the term religion and spirituality interchangeably. I certainly did until I wrote a whole freaking book about this. But if you're someone who's given it a lot of thought, I think you have strong opinions about what you are one way or the other, because you've been forced to really define it. Yeah.
When I think about it too, I mean, especially like in that context of politics, like religions are protected in our culture. Supposedly, they aren't always.
Theoretically, yeah. Something First Amendment.
Right. And people tend to say, well, it's just a practice that's not protected. And I'm like, man, that's splitting hairs to me. Like if you're, the reason I think of that is like this is pretty recent when we're recording, is the woman in Pennsylvania whose shop was visited by police officers because she offers tarot readings and they're illegal in the state of Pennsylvania to read tarot, even though that is part of her witchcraft practice to use tarot for divination purposes.
I mean, I would say in the context of the First Amendment, in the context of persecution, yeah, we're definitely splitting hairs, because I think the meaning, not that I'm a constitutional lawyer, although it is a career I considered at one point. Freedom of religion, I think, means freedom to do whatever you want with your spiritual life, and no one is allowed to persecute you for it. And I think tarot definitely. My understanding is that the cops ended up leaving her alone, I think precisely because a lot of lawyers were probably like, you're going to lose this war, buddy.
Yeah.
You're messing with some foundational American shit right here. Like, don't.
Well, and
leave her alone.
Even the people who were kind of arguing that, it's on the books because it was originally to prevent charlatans from fleecing people.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, okay. Charlatans shouldn't be allowed to fleece people, whatever the methodology is. Like, that's already a law. So,
yeah. I mean, that's also interesting how that became illegal, but then other forms of divination maybe didn't, like, well, I might be a little bit out of my depth here, but I feel like there are probably some faith healing, some Christian faith healing things that would never come under the same kind of fire as a tarot reader.
Unless somebody gets injured, right? And then those things are questioned.
Right.
Yeah. So,
but even then, I feel like usually it all ends up getting it. Freedom of religion tends to win, even in the case where you're talking about people getting life-saving treatment in hospitals that might go against their religious beliefs. A lot of the time, the freedom of religion wins, and sometimes people end up getting hurt because doctors are like, I can't, I won't. I mean, you could look. I was thinking about what's that group? Christian Science group, where there's one that doesn't do blood transfusions.
Jehovah's Witnesses, I think.
Jehovah's Witness. But I'm also thinking about all of the, the fucking Walgreens pharmacists who won't fill your birth control pills because they think God wants you to have a baby. Like, it's all the same thing. And I don't know what ended up happening to those people, but I never heard about them getting fired.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that.
So what if my God says, absolutely don't have a baby? We're in an impasse here. Fill my prescription.
Yeah. My guess is another pharmacist was like, I'll do it because Trish is dramatic, or whatever.
Yeah. Just pray you're not at one of those Walgreens where they have one pharmacist that they work to death into the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a whole thing. But again, I think you and I could continue this conversation for hours, and I would love to. But I also know that, my attention span is about an hour. Yeah. And I think most people's are. So
delightful to chat with you, though, very much.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you for this book. Like, I think it's really interesting and important. And I hope witches, non-witches, men, everyone read this book.
I would love to hear from men who read the book. I mean, I have a feeling very few are going to, but I am just dying for my first message from a man. Can't wait. Yeah.
Well, fingers crossed it happens soon. WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press and is edited by Julian Rashke. Our intro music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew Kay, and our outro music is Voices by Alexander Shenekar. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and Threads at witchlitpod. Please help other witches find us by leaving a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to and reading WitchLit.